Hi there, I'm Cameraman. Has this ever been you? Well, worry no more. By the end of this helpful and easy to follow infotainment video, you'll have what it takes to really stick it to those professional photographers that you see in the wild. Thanks, cameraman. You're welcome, citizen.
The world of photography can be a scary place. There's so many interplaying concepts to keep track of, like ISO, aperture, shutter speed,
Bracket modes, metering modes, slow and quick modes, lens compensation, picture profiles.
It can all just be so overwhelming. But it doesn't have to be. Trust me, I was once in your shoes, and sometimes I still am.
Bet you didn't know I had access to your shoes, huh? Did ya?
My goal in this video is going to be about breaking down the absolute basics of manual photography in nice, easy, relatable info, and hopefully which you can apply to your own photography in order to be able to get started on your own journey. Now, for me personally, I'm horrified of all things manual, which makes my day-to-day life really hard. But just because I'm a scaredy cat doesn't mean that you have to be. Today I'm going to be breaking down the 3 primes of manual photography: shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. Which once you get the hang of, the rest of the manual concepts will more or less just look like child's play.
Buenos dias, Marco.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I just had a nightmare that I was an offensive caricature for the sake of a shitty wordplay joke in a YouTube video.
It's not real. Come back to sleep.
Yeah, I might use the bathroom first. It's okay. It's okay. Manuel's just a nightmare. He can't get you. You're fine. But in order to have any kind of real control over any of these settings, we must first overcome what is arguably the biggest and scariest step of anyone's photography journey: switching to manual mode. See? That wasn't so bad. Now, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of manual photography, it is super important to make sure that we change our photo's file type from JPEG to RAW.
It's raw. It's fucking raw.
This ensures that the photo is uncompressed and can later be edited in photo editing software without loss of quality. You can find the setting here in Sony cameras and should be in a similar location in other cameras too. Sticking with the food theme, RAW files are like having all the fresh ingredients of a hamburger that's ready to be made, but you still have the ability to chop and change those ingredients before it's served. Don't like cheese? Take it off. Love pickles? Add a whole bunch. You're in complete control of what the end product of this burger looks like. A JPEG, however, is like an already served hamburger. If you got served cheese and don't like cheese, good luck taking it off without completely ruining the whole thing.
What? I was hungry.
RAW files essentially allow for maximum quality photos that can be edited down later into easier to share JPEG files once you've made them to your liking. Shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, or SOA for short, are unique settings in photography in that when one is changed, the other two are also affected. This is known as the exposure triangle, which kind of sounds like a banned Sesame Street character who's now on several government watch lists. In reality though, the exposure triangle looks more like this, and is designed to help you understand what settings are needed in order to get the right amount of light in a photo, hence the term exposure. These three settings are all highly dependent on the amount of light available to you, whether it be natural light or artificial light. The ideal placement for these settings is going to be somewhere within the middle of the triangle. But if that's not possible to you, you need to understand what it is that you're changing or sacrificing in order to still get the shot. Your ability to see how properly exposed your image will be in the moment can usually be seen through your camera's built-in light meter, which should look like this or this. The closer to zero that you are, the closer you are to a correctly exposed photo, with any minus numbers meaning that the photo is underexposed and any positive numbers meaning that the photo is overexposed. Another judgment of exposure is to look at the histogram graph as well. The closer your bell curve is to the center, the better exposed the photo is. If your curve starts high and goes flat, it means there's not enough light exposure to get any detail, and vice versa. Obviously, keep in mind that this is all for a correctly exposed photograph and doesn't take into account any of the creative liberties that you as an artist will want to make. But understanding how these settings work and interplay with each other will help you express your artistic needs much easier. Let's start with shutter speed. And firstly, no, it has nothing to do with how fastly you can duck away from your blinds while peeping on your next door neighbors.
Oi! What are you looking at?
Oh shit! Shutter speed, or sometimes also referred to as exposure time, in simple terms is more or less the equivalence of your camera blinking, and the term shutter itself comes from the literal curtain that is in front of your camera's sensor and acts somewhat like an eyelid. The higher the shutter speed, the faster your camera blinks, or how fast the shutter curtain moves across the camera's sensor, and in turn affects just how much light hits the sensor or film in that time frame. Cameras measure their shutter speeds in seconds and fractions of seconds, and will typically have shutter speeds that vary anywhere from 30-second blinks to blinks that occur in 1/8000th of a second. For comparison, a human blink is only 1/110th of a second. Which shutter speed you choose depends entirely upon the subject that you're shooting. With slower shutter speeds, usually less than 1/125, I'd recommend you have a tripod on deck to offset any imperceptible movements you would normally experience from holding it by hand. This is because movement will be exaggerated at lower shutter speed, and your photo will turn out blurry, and we don't want that.
Unless, of course, you enjoy breaking the rules. Cuff him, boys. He's resisting.
Now, it is crucial to remember that the light already available to you in any given scenario will highly affect on what shutter speed that you use. If it's a bright sunny day and you set your shutter speed low, it'll come out looking like you just got flashbanged in Call of Duty. Conversely, set your shutter speed too fast and it'll look like midday was midnight. And trust me, something mundane in the middle of the day can look super sinister at night.
There's something about flying a kite at night that's so unwholesome. Hello, Mother dear.
Shutter speed is somewhat paradoxical in nature, being one of the strictest settings to nail in order to get a sharp, good-looking photo, but then also having the most freedom for creative expression outside of composition and subject matter. For example, 10 to 30 second exposure times are perfect for astrophotography, which requires enough time to catch enough light into the sensor so you can really see all the detail in the night sky and the movement of the stars as the Earth rotates. 1 to 10 second exposure times work wonders for creating the dreamy blurred water effects that you see in waterfall photos and beach settings. These exposure times can even be used for painting with highway car lights that create those bright red and orange stripes in the dark. A 1 second to 1/125 second shutter speeds can be amazing for capturing panning action shots. 1/125th of a second to 1/1000th of a second, I would say, is probably going to be your most used shutter speed, whether it's intentional or not, as this is usually the sweet spot to achieve sharp, correctly exposed photos in normal daylight. Shutter speeds above 1/1000th are usually reserved for frozen in time moments where you want to capture something fast but don't want to risk the aesthetic action lines around it, such as bird, sports, or car photography. Just make sure that you brought your reaction time to go along with it. There's also way more advanced shutter speed techniques, like shutter drag, light painting, motion trails, and more. Shutter speed is definitely the one setting that really allows you to break the rules and go your own way with it, just as long as you understand what those rules are. And that brings us to our next setting. ISO, or for you acronym haters out there, stands for the International Organization of Standardization. The term ISO is not an acronym, but is actually an abbreviation of the Greek word isos, which means to be equal. And equal means whatever they say it means, so suck it up. Funnily though, if you've ever seen a .iso file on your computer, it's actually named after its standardization set by the organization. In terms of photography, ISO was originally used way back in ye old times before the digital revolution
Handed us to our AI overlords on a platter.
to describe the sensitivity of photographic film to light. The higher the number, the more sensitive that film was to light exposure. And these values ranged anywhere from 100 all the way up to 3200. In today's usage, the term remains pretty much the same, except now with the advent of digital camera sensors, it's baked conveniently into every camera, and ISO now being able to skyrocket way past 3200 due to newer expanded ISO values that can reach all the way up to 100,000 or more. If you've ever heard the term film grain or digital noise, ISO is the baby responsible for it. And many a camera and Photoshop filter have tried to recreate its aesthetic vibe in recent years. Vibes aside, ISO can very much be your make or break kind of setting, with many photographers
Fearing its awful and godlike power.
Photography purists will curse any ISO above 100 and say that you may as well go toss your camera in the bin and go shoot on a phone camera like the heathen that you are.
What? Oh, okay.
But in reality, there are plenty of use cases for a high ISO. So those photography purists can just go suck a lemon.
Huh? What? No!
Sure, low ISO does produce a sharper, more true to reality image, but that doesn't mean people should be afraid of shooting above ISO 100, especially if the situation or needs call for it. And anyways, if you do have to shoot at a high ISO, Lightroom's built-in noise reduction feature is great at fixing those imperfections. Just don't get too lost in the sauce with it though, otherwise your photos will come out looking smoother and more plasticky than the sex dolls in those photography purist bedrooms. ISO is probably going to be your go-to setting to change on the fly, given any scenario, as small changes in ISO can translate to much brighter images in poorly lit scenes. Going from ISO 100 to ISO 400 can really bring up your image to a proper exposure, and the digital noise will still be imperceptible. On top of that, if your settings require a specific shutter speed or aperture to create a desired effect, ISO is going to be the one setting that you can change without it completely ruining your photo. It's kind of like a wildcard setting, but just be careful because it is wild. It's like the great photographer Wayne Gretzky once said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That's kind of it for ISO really. You'll definitely be relying on it a lot to make sure that your images stay sharp while also properly exposed. Just don't go too hard on it though, otherwise you'll end up with some kind of grainy looking mess like a zoomed in Samsung photo. Now that leads us into the final pillar of this trio of giants. Aperture, or as it's more affectionately known, f-stop, is the big boss of these three settings and requires the most diving into. Now, if you can think of a camera's sensor as the cones and rods inside of your eye, shutter speed as the blinks of an eye, then it's safe to assume that the aperture of a camera is like its pupil, dilating and constricting to correct the amount of light needed to correctly expose a scene.
Without aperture, imagine trying to navigate a dark room immediately after turning off a light. And then you manage to find your way out of your parents' dark, dank basement and stare wide-eyed directly into broad daylight, without your pupils adjusting for the sudden influx of light.
Great, now I'm blind. The value of an f-stop is determined mathematically and is consistent between all cameras and lenses, meaning that an aperture of f2.8 will always be f2.8. The actual math and how f-stop is calculated doesn't actually matter though. Because I'm bad at math. But I can hear all you math nerds yelling at me from the comments, so I won't edge you any longer. The mathematical equation for determining an f-stop is this. There, are you happy now? Did you get your rocks off to that? Good, because that's all you're getting. The only thing you really need to remember about aperture is that if you need to add more light into an underexposed scene, you would reduce your f-stop, going from say f5.6 to f2.8, which would open up the aperture and expose the sensor to more light, and vice versa for reducing light in an overexposed scene. But before you use aperture as your go-to setting to change on the fly, there's a couple more aspects about it that you should probably understand first. Besides controlling how much light is let into the sensor, the camera's aperture also determines what's called the depth of field. Depth of field refers to how much of an image is in focus around the subject of your photo. An easy experiment we can try right now to better show off depth of field through your own eyes is if you take your index finger and hold it close to your face and then focus on it. Go ahead and give it a go now. Have you given it a shot? Ooh, man. You should see how cross-eyed you look right now. Oh, that's a good one. I'm gonna keep that. It's actually really good, thank you. But seriously, as you bring your finger closer to your face and focus on it, you will notice how your peripheral vision becomes more out of focus and spotty. But then as you take your index finger away from your face and then focus on it, your peripheral vision does come back into focus a bit more clearly and less spotty. Cameras pretty much work on this exact same premise. Your use of depth of field and aperture will highly depend on what subject it is that you're shooting and also your creative style. Typically though, a shallow depth of field, anything below f2.8, is mostly utilized in portraiture or product photography when you only want that single thing to be focused in the image. A larger depth of field, around f11 or higher, is more commonly used for landscape and street photography. This allows for all the information in frame to also be sharp and in focus to paint more of the picture. This is obviously not a strict rule, but in day-to-day use is typically what you'll see happening. Now, as I mentioned, a low f-stop will actually cause a lot of blur and spots around the subject of your photo, as long as there's actual depth to be had. This is actually a sought-after aesthetic by photographers, referred to by the Japanese word bokeh, which literally translates to blur, haze, or to be out of focus. Now, the quality of a lens's bokeh comes down to how many aperture blades there are in the lens. These blades are formed in a circular pattern within the lens, and the more blades there are, the more aesthetically pleasing the spots appear to be in the final image. Now, aperture is the one setting that is completely determined by the lens that you attach to it. And hopefully, when you went to go buy your own camera, the options of lenses available to you were hopefully plentiful. And honestly, lenses probably deserve an entire video of their own. So please make sure to subscribe and stick around for that video as well. The good news is that all lenses have the ability to achieve really high f-stops, such as f22, which is great for helping achieve what's called focusing to infinity.
To infinity and beyond!
The bad news is that a lot of lenses are priced around how low of an f-stop they can achieve, such as f1.4. This is usually because getting to such a low value is very expensive and also hard to manufacture, while also keeping the image sharp. Fun fact, the lowest f-stop ever on any lens was f0.6, and it belongs to the 50mm Carl Zeiss planar lens, made in 1966. Only 10 were ever made. 6 were given to NASA, 3 were bought by Stanley Kubrick, and only 1 was kept by the company. Kubrick bought them so that he could film his cult classic Barry Lyndon completely by candlelight, without the need for any studio equipment. Well, I think that about covers it all, right? Think again! You know how I said there was only 3 primes of photography? Well, I lied. Only kind of. The fact is that the exposure triangle is actually at the mercy of your camera's zoom. Now let's take a look at these two Sony lenses. Can you spot the difference? The reason for the massive price difference is because of their relationship between aperture and zoom. As you go from a wide angle like 28mm to a tighter zoom like 70mm, on an entry-level lens with an aperture variation like 3.5 to 5.6, there has to be compensation in the loss of light entering the lens. Whereas on the lens with the constant aperture of f2, it is able to maintain the same level of light no matter the zoom, so settings don't have to be changed. A lens's ability to keep a constant aperture at different focal lengths while remaining sharp will always be the main factor for price differences. But that being said, if you don't need an aperture that low, or mind having to change your other settings, both lenses are great options, especially if you're on a budget and need that extra focal length. It's what understanding the exposure triangle is all about. Now that we've covered all individual settings, the easiest way I found to practice with how they all interplay with each other was to set up a stationary object like a vase, cup, or other mundane household item, and literally just mess around with all the settings and see what happens. Another way to practice, funnily enough, is to actually put your camera back into automatic mode and watch all the settings change as you point them at the same objects you just practiced with. Take a couple of photos and compare them to see how they differ. Hopefully now you're ready to go out into the world to give manual photography a go. There are so many more settings than what I described in this video, but this was just to get you acquainted with the big 3. So go out there and practice. Well, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for sticking it out with me. I hope you had fun. If you did find it helpful or at least a little bit funny, please do consider liking and subscribing to stick around for more. And if you did have any suggestions on topics you'd like for me to cover in the future, please do leave a comment down below and I will make sure to check them out. But that's all from me for this video. Again, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of it. And remember to always be kind and rewind.